On the first Monday of almost every month, at exactly noon, a sound rolls across the river valleys south of Seattle. It starts as a chime, almost pleasant, like a doorbell from a very large house. Then a voice follows, in English and then in Spanish, telling everyone within earshot that this is only a test. People in Outrunning and Sumner and Puyallup barely look up. They have heard it their whole lives. Their kids have heard it since kindergarten. It is background noise now, a part of the weather. But that chime exists for one reason, and the machine playing it was built to make a very different sound. When it makes that other sound, the wailing one that does not stop, it will mean a wall of wet concrete is already moving down the valley toward them, and that they have somewhere between 40 minutes and the rest of their lives to get to higher ground. The mountain that chime is watching is 59 miles from downtown Seattle. It is the most photographed peak in America. The postcard behind the skyline. The thing people drive toward on a clear day just to look at. Its name is Mount Rainier. And the United States Geological Survey calls it the single most dangerous volcano in the country. Here is the part that should stop you. Right now today, Rainier is not erupting. There is no ash column. No lava. The official alert level reads normal. And that is exactly the problem. Because the thing that makes this mountain lethal does not need an eruption to happen. It does not need a warning. And once it starts, no human being on Earth can outrun it. So the real question is not whether Rainier will do this again. It has done it at least 60 times in the last 10,000 years. The real question is how many minutes the people living in its shadow will get when it finally does. And whether 40 minutes is enough. To understand what is coming, you first have to understand what you are looking at, because the postcard is lying to you. From a distance, Rainier looks serene, a perfect snow-capped cone floating above the suburbs. That serenity is a disguise. Rainier is an active stratovolcano, 14,410 feet tall. The highest peak in Washington, and the most topographically dominant mountain in the lower 48. It last erupted in the 1890s, when observers in Seattle and Tacoma watched small explosions puff from its summit. It is not dead. It is resting. There is a difference. And it used to be bigger. Around 5,000 years ago, Rainier stood closer to 16,000 feet. Then, the top 600 meters of the mountain simply slid off and were gone. We will come back to where it went, because that is the worst part of this entire story. Now look at the white. Rainier carries 25 glaciers on its back, more ice and permanent snow than every other volcano in the Cascade Range combined. Stand at the base, and it looks beautiful. But ice is just water that has not started moving yet, and under that ice, the mountain is quietly rotting from the inside. Here is what almost no one looking at that postcard understands. For 500,000 years, hot acidic groundwater has been seeping through the volcano's core, and slowly, chemically, it has been turning hard volcanic rock into something soft. Geologists call it hydrothermal alteration. In plain terms, the heat and acid converts solid stone into weak, water-logged clay. The most beautiful, most symmetrical part of a stratovolcano is built in layers, and those layers are being eaten from within. The whole western flank of Mount Rainier, the side that faces the towns, is now a tower of wet clay holding itself up out of habit. That is the setup. A 4,000-meter mountain, packed with more ice than anything around it, with its load-bearing wall quietly turning to mud, leaning over a valley where 150,000 people now live and work. Nothing about that arrangement is stable. It is a question of when the wall lets go, not if. And here is the comparison that should put the scale in perspective. In 1980, Mount St. Helens erupted about 90 miles to the south and killed 57 people, and it became the defining American volcanic disaster of the last century. Rainier is nearly twice the size of St. Helens. It carries vastly more ice, and it sits beside a metropolitan area instead of a wilderness. If Rainier did what St. Helens did, the result would not be twice as bad. It would be in a category St. Helens never reached, because there is that much more ice to melt and that many more people standing under it. And when it lets go, it does not make lava. It makes a lahar. You need to understand this word, because it is the entire reason Rainier keeps scientists awake at night. A lahar is a volcanic mudflow. But that phrase is dangerously soft, so let me describe what it actually is. Take the ice and snow on the summit. Add collapsing rock. Add water from the glaciers and the saturated clay. Now mix it into a churning slurry with the exact consistency of wet concrete and send it down a mountainside that drops 9,000 feet into a river valley. It does not trickle. It does not flood the way rivers flood. It comes as a moving wall, dozens of feet tall, and it moves at 30 to 50 miles an hour. Picture that for a second. Picture the largest, most violent flood you can imagine. Now remove the water and replace it with liquid stone, heavy enough to carry boulders the size of houses and whole forests of trees. Fast enough to keep pace with a car on a highway. It does not flow around buildings. It erases them. It does not rise slowly so you can grab your things. It arrives all at once, and where it passes, it leaves the valley floor buried under tens of feet of hardened mud, flat and gray and silent, as if a town had never been there at all. And here is the line that matters most. You cannot outrun a lahar. The people who have tried are part of the geological record now. A lahar moving 50 miles an hour does not care how fast you drive when the one road out of your town is already a parking lot of everyone else trying to leave. You cannot outrun it on foot. You cannot outrun it by car. The only thing that beats a lahar is being uphill before it starts. Which means the only thing that saves you is time. And time is the one thing this mountain refuses to promise. But here is what almost nobody connects when they hear volcanic mudflow. It does not need the volcano to erupt at all. This is the detail that changes everything. We assume disasters announce themselves. We assume that before a mountain kills a city, there will be warning. Weeks of earthquakes, gas, smoke, scientists on the news telling everyone to leave. With Rainier's greatest threat, that assumption can get you killed. Because the most recent large lahar from this mountain came with no eruption at all. It is called the Outrun mudflow, and it happened around the year 1500, roughly 5 centuries ago, well within recorded human history elsewhere on Earth. There was no eruption. There were no weeks of warning. A chunk of the weakened western flank, an area now called the Sunset Amphitheater, simply gave way. 260 million cubic meters of rock and ice transformed into a lahar and poured 60 miles down the Puyallup River Valley, all the way to the lowlands. When it stopped, it had buried an old-growth forest standing right where the town of Outrunning sits today, snapping trees 10 feet thick and entombing them under mud. At the valley floor, it was 100 feet deep. At Outrunning, about 20 feet. No eruption. No warning. Just a mountain quietly deciding its western wall had held long enough. And the USGS has stated plainly that the west flank of Rainier remains vulnerable to exactly this kind of collapse. Today, with no eruption required. A landslide off that face could send a fast-moving lahar down the Puyallup, the Mowich, the Nisqually, or Tacoma Creek with effectively no notice from the volcano itself. Now you understand why the chime plays every month. It is not waiting for an eruption. It is waiting for a sound. But the Outrun mudflow was the small one. I want you to sit with that. Because everything I just described, the 60-mile flow, the buried forest, the 100-foot wall of mud, that was Rainier on a modest day. To find the event that haunts every geologist who studies this mountain, you have to go back 5,600 years to the Osceola Mudflow, and this is where the missing 600 meters of summit finally reappear in the story. That collapse, the one that took Rainier from 16,000 feet down to 14, did not just fall off the mountain. It became the largest lahar in the volcano's known history. A wall of rock and clay and ice broke away from the northeast flank, and within a mile and a half had transformed into a flowing mass of mud. The crater it left behind was over a mile wide, a horseshoe gouged into the top of the mountain, almost the same size as the one Mount St. Helens blew open in 1980. Then it started moving. The Osceola Mudflow carried away 3.8 cubic kilometers of the mountain. It traveled more than 70 miles. It buried over 200 square miles of the Puget Sound lowland under mud that, in places, was the height of a 30-story building. It poured down the White River system, swallowed the ground where Enumclaw now stands, filled the valleys where Buckley and Sumner and Puyallup now sit, and it did not stop until it reached the sea. It flowed into Puget Sound itself. It buried the ground beneath present-day Auburn under 260 feet of debris. It reached as far as Kent, a suburb of Seattle, and pushed sediment into the arm of the Sound, where the Port of Seattle now operates. Read that again. The ground under Auburn, under Kent, under the southern reach of the Seattle Metro, the ground that millions of people live on, drive on, and build on every single day, is the dried remains of a wall of mud that came off this mountain. 6 American cities and towns sit on top of old Rainier lahars right now. They are not in the path of a future disaster. They are built on the corpse of an old one. If the Osceola Mudflow happened today, a geologist with a Washington engineering firm has said plainly, it would destroy Enumclaw, Orting, Kent, Auburn, Puyallup, Sumner, and all of Renton. Not damage. Destroy, and Interstate 5, the spine of the entire West Coast, along with the Port of Tacoma, would be erased from service for an indefinite, possibly permanent length of time. And this is where it stops being a local story. Tacoma sits at the very mouth of the Puyallup River, 37 miles from the summit. Its port one of the busiest in the country. The river valleys that drain Rainier, the Puyallup, the Carbon, the White, the Nisqually, are not empty channels. They are packed with highways, rail lines, bridges, pipelines, data, and people. The working circulatory system of the South Puget Sound. A major lahar would not just bury towns. It would sever the corridor that moves goods up and down the western United States, cut the rail and the interstate in the same hour, and drop a layer of hardened mud across an economy that the rest of the country quietly depends on. The cleanup would not be measured in weeks. It would be measured in years, and some of what it buried would simply never come back. If that just sank in, if you are starting to understand that this is not a story about a national park, but about the ground a major American city is standing on, do me one favor and subscribe to this channel. Everything we make is built to show you the real version of how the planet works. The version that does not fit on a postcard. It costs you nothing, and it makes sure you see the next one. Now let me show you what 40 minutes actually looks like for the people who live closest to it. Because somewhere in that valley, there is a town that has accepted what the rest of us refuse to. It is called Orting, population roughly 8,000. And it sits at the exact confluence of the Puyallup and the Carbon rivers, 2 drainages that both run straight off the mountain's weakened side. There may be no community on Earth that lives more consciously in the shadow of its own destruction. The USGS estimates that a resident of Orting faces a 1 in 7 chance that a catastrophic lahar will come through in their lifetime. 1 in 7. Those are not the odds of a freak accident. Those are the odds of a coin that is badly, frighteningly weighted. So, Orting prepared. The USGS modeling shows that a large lahar off the upper Puyallup could reach the town in as little as 40 to 50 minutes after it begins. 40 minutes, against a wall of mud that nothing can outrun. So the warning sirens were planted up and down the valley. Evacuation routes were painted on the roads, pointing uphill, posted on what feels like every other block. And the children of Orting, drill for this the way kids elsewhere drill for fire. In March of 2024, more than 45,000 students across the valley, from Orting and Puyallup and Sumner and White River and Carbonado, walked out of their classrooms together and practiced running from the mountain. It was the largest lahar evacuation drill in the history of the world. 45,000 children lining up, leaving their schools on the valley floor and walking toward high ground, rehearsing the day the chime stops being a chime. They do it every 2 years. The kids know the routes by heart. Think about what it means to grow up somewhere that your school has a plan for the mountain. And you might be wondering why anyone stays. Why a family would raise children on the floor of a valley a mountain has buried before, under a siren that tells them, monthly, exactly how they might die. But that question is easier to ask from a distance than to answer up close. The valley is home. The houses are paid for, or close to it. The soil is rich, the rivers are beautiful, and the mountain that threatens them is also the view they fell in love with, glowing pink at sunrise over the back fence. The odds, 1 in 7 across a lifetime, feel abstract on an ordinary Tuesday, the way a seatbelt feels unnecessary, right up until it isn't. So they stay, and they prepare, and they teach their kids the routes, and they make the same quiet bargain that people make in the shadow of every beautiful, dangerous place on Earth. They bet on time. They bet that the warning will come early enough. The entire town is built on that bet. But here is what nobody tells you about that warning system, and it is the detail that turns the whole thing cold. The sirens do not stop. When a real lahar is detected, the system is designed to sound the wailing tone continuously, and it keeps wailing until one of two things happens. Until the batteries finally die, or until the sirens themselves are destroyed by the very thing they were warning about. That is the honest engineering of it. The people who built this system understood that some of these sirens will spend their final seconds screaming into a valley that is already gone. And they built them to do it anyway, because the ones further down the line, the ones still standing, might buy someone another minute. The system works like this. Buried in the riverbeds high in the valley are sensors called acoustic flow monitors, listening for the specific ground vibration a moving lahar makes. The instant they feel it, the signal races to emergency operations centers far faster than the mud can travel, and the order goes out to the sirens. The whole thing was first switched on in 1998, and right now it is being upgraded, with new monitoring stations, real-time cameras, and faster transmission. Starting with the Puyallup drainage. Ask yourself why a system gets a major upgrade after 25 years of quiet. It is not because the threat went away. It is because the people who watch this mountain most closely are not relaxing. They are tightening their grip. And if you are ever in that valley, and the sky is clear, and the sirens are not scheduled, and they start to wail anyway, there is one more thing to know. You may also hear it before any siren. Witnesses to lahars describe a sound that arrives ahead of the wall itself, a deep rumbling roar, like a freight train or a jet engine that has no business being on the ground. If you hear that, the official guidance is brutally simple. Do not call anyone. Do not wait for instructions. Do not go back for anything. Move uphill immediately on the fastest path you can find, and do not stop climbing. So why is everyone so certain this will happen again? Because the machine that built Rainier never switched off. The mountain sits where two slabs of the Earth's crust grind together, one diving beneath the other, melting, feeding magma upward for hundreds of thousands of years. That process is still running. The glaciers are still there, more ice than any peak around it. The western flank is still weakening, clay by clay, year by year. Every ingredient that produced the Osceola Mudflow and the Outrun mudflow is still present on that mountain today, in larger supply, hanging over far more people than have ever lived beneath it before. The honest scientists will tell you they cannot give you a date. That is true, and they are right to say it. Nobody can tell you whether the next great lahar comes in 1,000 years or while you are reading this sentence. A landslide off that weakened face could begin with no earthquake, no eruption, no warning the volcano chooses to give. That uncertainty is not comfort. It is the whole danger. You cannot prepare for a specific Tuesday. You can only prepare for the fact that the Tuesday is coming. 150,000 people live and work on ground that a Rainier lahar has already buried at least once. More than 80,000 of them live directly inside the official hazard zones, on the valley floors and the path. Their schools sit on old mud. Their highways cross it. Their children rehearse leaving it. And above all of them, 59 miles from a skyline of glass towers, a 14,000-foot mountain leans a little further west every year, holding up a wall it has already let go of twice. So picture that valley one more time. It is the first Monday of the month. It is noon. The chime rolls out across Ording and Sumner and Puyallup. Pleasant, familiar, ignored, a voice says. In English and in Spanish, that this is only a test. And somewhere up on the mountain, under 25 glaciers and 500,000 years of rotting stone, the western flank holds for one more day. It will not hold forever. Mount Rainier does not send warnings forever. At some point, it simply moves. And when it does, the only thing standing between 150,000 people and the largest wall of mud most of them will ever see is a sound, and the head start it buys. If this video made you look at that beautiful mountain a little differently, that is the point. Subscribe so the algorithm shows you the next one, and check the description below where I have linked a simple, free guide on how lahar evacuation zones work and how the people who live in them actually prepare. Because understanding the ground beneath your feet is never wasted. The chime will play again next month. The people in the valley will barely look up. The only question that has ever mattered